Human evolution has a famous story. Steadily bigger brains, steadily smaller faces, one clean straight path. But brand new research says that familiar story might be almost entirely wrong. A 2026 study went back and tested that story against every fossil skull dataset science has. The result directly challenges nearly everything textbooks teach us about becoming human. So what actually shaped the human skull for 2.5 million years? The real answer, it turns out, involves far more luck than anyone ever expected. The genus Homo first appeared about 2.5 million years ago. Since then, one trend always seemed obvious. Brains kept steadily getting bigger over time. At the very same time, faces and jaws kept steadily getting smaller and smaller. Most textbooks describe this as one steady, continuous march toward modern humans. The classic explanation: bigger brains meant smarter, more capable humans. Smaller faces meant less chewing, thanks to tools and cooked food. It always sounded like a clean, satisfying story of constant, ongoing improvement. But clean stories aren't always the true ones. In 2026, researchers Mark Hubbe and Katerina Harvati put this to the test. Mark Hubbe works as a professor of anthropology at the University of Tennessee-Knoxville. Katerina Harvati leads human evolution research at the University of Tübingen in Germany. Together, the two researchers examined 87 fossil skulls spanning the entire history of Homo. These skulls spanned early Homo species, Neanderthals, and fully modern humans alike. They carefully grouped these fossils into 8 distinct evolutionary units for comparison. Then they systematically tested 6 different evolutionary models directly against the fossil data. One model: steady, directional selection pushing traits in one direction. Another model: pure random genetic drift with no clear direction at all. A third: long periods of total evolutionary stillness, called stasis. For brain size specifically, one single model fit the fossil data far better than all the others. It wasn't steady selection, it was mostly random drift. Long stretches of essentially nothing changing, interrupted only occasionally by sudden shifts. In other words, brain growth wasn't a constant push towards smart. Much of that brain growth may have simply been random evolutionary chance. A trait that happened to stick around, not one steadily chosen. That finding directly contradicts the familiar textbook picture of the steadily smart-brained ape. It doesn't mean intelligence didn't matter. It means the pattern is messier. Sometimes brains genuinely changed, but often, for very long stretches, nothing happened at all. The same test was run on facial and jaw shape. Once again, random genetic drift and long stasis explain the pattern best of all. Shrinking faces weren't a steady optimization for efficient chewing. Instead, faces mostly stayed exactly the same for very long stretches of time. Then shifted suddenly, likely by chance, not by steady design. The smaller face equals smarter tool user story is far too simple. Reality looked more like long silence, punctuated by sudden change. So what do random drift and stasis actually mean? Genetic drift is random chance shaping which traits survive. No survival advantage required at all. Just random luck passed across many generations. Stasis means a species barely changes for very long stretches. Not because nothing is happening, but because nothing needs to. A whole population can stay remarkably stable for hundreds of thousands of consecutive years. Then a sudden shift in environment or sudden isolation breaks that long stability. That's the exact moment when real evolutionary change can suddenly, unexpectedly appear. This finding actually flips the classic question researchers used to ask about our evolution. The old question, why did brains keep getting bigger? The new question, what let evolution break its own rules? Under exactly what conditions did those old biological constraints finally give way? Harvati suggests this shift in thinking may be far more useful for future research. It focuses attention on the moments constraints broke, rather than assuming constant progress. Evolution, in this view, isn't a ladder climbing steadily upward. It's long, flat stretches, with the occasional random leap. Humans didn't march toward intelligence. We stumbled into parts of it. That's a very different origin story than the one most people learned in school. It's tempting to see evolution as a story of progress. Bigger brain, smaller face, smarter species always improving. But evolution doesn't actually work toward a goal. It has no destination in mind at all, and no final form it is reaching toward. Traits simply stick around because they happen to survive, not because they are objectively better. Sometimes a trait spreads through pure random chance alone. That challenges a very human instinct, to see ourselves as inevitable. Modern humans often assume, quietly and confidently, that our brains were evolution's ultimate end goal. This new study suggests we may just be one lucky chance outcome among countless others. Not fate, not destiny, just a very long roll of the dice. This finding doesn't erase natural selection from human evolution entirely. To be clear, natural selection clearly still mattered, at certain moments, for certain specific traits. But it wasn't the constant engine driving every single change. Much of our own skull's shape may simply be a quiet historical accident. That single finding reshapes how scientists will study every future fossil discovery. Researchers may now need to ask entirely different questions about these same old bones. Not just what changed, but the deeper question of why did anything change at all. This kind of careful study reminds us that fossils rarely tell simple, tidy stories. Every single skull quietly holds millions of years of chance, stillness, and rare change. Reading that history correctly fundamentally changes how we understand ourselves as a species. Scientists compared skull shapes using detailed 3D landmark measurements. Every single measurement point becomes one data point inside the larger statistical model. This approach lets researchers test abstract evolutionary theories directly against real fossil evidence. It's a powerful method, but it needs a lot of good fossil data. 87 skulls sounds like a lot, but remember, it spans millions and millions of years. Each individual fossil represents a rare, precious snapshot frozen from one single moment. Piecing together that fragile timeline is part rigorous science, part patient detective work. And this new statistical analysis just quietly rewrote a key part of that old story. Not every big, confident idea in science survives its very first real test. This one didn't survive intact, at least not in its simplest, most familiar form. Good science ultimately means being willing to update the story whenever the data disagrees. That's exactly what just happened to one of human evolution's oldest, most familiar tales. So the next time someone confidently says evolution made us smarter on purpose, pause for a second. The real underlying story may be far stranger and far more random than expected. Humans exist here today, not because we were somehow destined to. We exist because of countless silent, uneventful generations, followed by brief bursts of sudden change. It's a genuinely humbling thought. Our big brains may simply be a happy accident, not necessarily the planned outcome of millions of years of constant selective pressure. Does that change how you personally see human evolution? Let us know in the comments. If this genuinely surprised you, subscribe for more scientific myths that research has just busted. Our brains grew larger, our faces grew smaller, but maybe, just maybe, not entirely on purpose. The real story of how we became human is far stranger than the textbook version ever let on.